In part 1 of this lecture, we learned about a special JavaScript object called HTML document that allows us to manipulate the web page. In this lecture, we're going to use that object to actually do just that. Let's go ahead and comment that out for now. And let's turn our attention to index.html. We have this paragraph here that says say hello to, and it has an input element and a button. Now the button is not really going to do anything, as you can see right here. As much as I click it, it won't really do anything because no behavior has been really assigned to it. Now we're going to have a whole lecture on event handling, but for now, let's assign it some simple behavior. And one of the ways at least you do it, is you could say onClick, which is an attribute that exists on basically every single element in the HTML document. And you can assign it some functionality in it. So in other words, you could call a JavaScript function in here. So we'll say hello. We'll call a function say hello on click of this button. Let's in fact actually put it right here so we could see it a little bit better. So on click of this button, we're going to call a function say hello. Let's go ahead and define the say hello function. Let's save that. And if I actually go ahead and click this now, we'll get an error because say hello is not defined yet. Well, let's go ahead and define that say hello function. So let's say function, and the function name is going to be say hello, and we don't need any arguments for now. And for now, in the body of this function, all I want to do is be able to retrieve the value that the user typed in into this text box. So how do I do that? Well, I can once again use my document. Let's do console.log. And once again, can use my document. Let's give some spacing over here. Document.getElementById. And I could say, what ID do I want? Well, let's go take a look at our HTML. And the ID of the input element is name. So I could go ahead and copy that. And I want getElementById name. But if I just do that and leave it alone right this way and save that, now when I click save, what I'm going to get is I'm going to get the actual element. Well, I don't really want the element. I want the value inside the element that the user typed in. So the way I do that is by accessing the value property, .value. When I do this and save it, so now if I say it, nothing is really going to show up because I didn't really type anything, but I'd say Yaakov and say it. Now Yaakov value is going to show up. Now my ultimate goal here is that the web page in this space right here should greet me, say hello Yaakov. So one of the ways I could do that is, first of all, save the value that I retrieved from the input element that the user typed in, save it in a variable. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say var message, or let's say name actually, and let's go ahead and erase this. Let's see if this will fit. No, it doesn't, so let's go ahead and just put it on the second line. And we'll just say var name equals, and we'll retrieve the name that the user typed in. Okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead and define a message, and the message will be hello space plus name that we retrieved plus, and let's give it an exclamation point. Okay, so now that we have the message, it's time to actually insert this message somewhere here. How do we do that? Let's take a look at our HTML document. There's this div that we defined and left completely empty, and it has an ID called content. Okay, so that means we could retrieve it as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that, and we know how to do that at this point. We could say document.getElementById, and the ID was content. So how do we now insert things? It wouldn't be that value because that's only for input elements, and a div is not an input element. But there is a property to be able to insert text inside of an element. So let's go ahead and actually put this on a separate line so I could see it a little bit better. And the value is text content. So if I say text content and say the text content is equal to message and put a semicolon after that and save that. So now when I say Yaakov and say it, this message shows up. And in fact, if we actually inspect the element, let's go ahead and do that. And you could see, let's lower this a little bit somehow. You could see that we have div ID equals content, and inside of it you see hello Yaakov. Now that's all great, except now what I really want is I want this Yaakov to be an H2. This is lecture 53, that's an H1. I want the Yaakov to be an H2. Well, let's try to see if we could do that. Let's go back to the console, and let's just augment this with a H2 and we'll close h2 right here to make it into a string. Okay, so now if we save that, let's say again Yaakov, and we'll click say it. Not quite what we wanted, right? H2 thinks, or at least the browser thinks, that this H2 is just text, not really something that the browser should render. Well, we can actually fix that because there's another property that tells the browser that what I'm inserting is actually HTML for the browser to render. So let's go ahead and copy this and comment it out, and we'll have another line that looks almost just like that, except the text content is going to be replaced with another property called inner HTML. So when we say inner HTML, the thing that gets assigned to it is going to be interpreted as HTML and therefore rendered. So now if we save that and type in Yaakov right here, and now we see that this is now in fact an H2. So if we inspect the element, we could see here now that the div with ID content has an H2 inside of it that is actually being definitely rendered as an H2. Now, believe it or not, armed just with this knowledge alone, you could already do quite a bit inside your HTML page. So let's go ahead and put some behavior into this that has a little bit more smarts into it. I want this thing to say hello, whatever the name is that the user provides, unless of course they say hello student, in which case I don't want it just to say hello student. I want that value to trigger a side effect to the page and change our title a little bit. So how can we accomplish that? Well, we could definitely test inside the say hello method or say hello function. We could test if name, let's move that all the way here. If name is equal triple equals, because we want it to be a string, equal to student, then I want to do a couple of things. Number one is I want to retrieve what this title is because I want to add a little bit of a string right here. I want to add something else to it. I want to say lecture 53 and something else. So the way I do that is I could say var title equals, and at this point let's go ahead actually and put it on the second line and say document dot, and we can, if we wanted to, say get element by ID right here and basically specify title, because if we look at our index.html page, our title, our h1 has a title as an ID. However, there's another method that's very worthwhile for you to learn, and it's much more generic than get element by ID, because get element by ID really just restricts you to be able to select things within your page by ID, but you might want to be able to select it by other things. So like for example, the way you select things using CSS. So the method we could use instead of get element by ID is called query selector. And in this case, query selector takes not the ID name, but actually a selector. So if we wanted to select it by ID, in this case title, you would do the same thing you would do in CSS by selecting this element. Well, the way you would do that is you would actually specify # title, right? Because that's a CSS selector, not just title itself. So this should go ahead and grab the h1 element out of our HTML page. Except we don't just want the h1 element, what we want is the text content of the h1 element. So let's go ahead and say dot text content, and that will be the value of our title. So now all we want to do is now we want to augment the title a little bit. So let's go ahead and say title plus equals, you've seen this before, it just means title equals title plus something, but the easier way is just to say plus equals, and we're going to add something. Let's say and loving it. So it's lecture 53 and loving it. So the student is really loving it at this point. Am I correct or am I correct? Anyway, so let's go on. So now let's go ahead and save this, and we'll go ahead and put name here. Well, if I put Yaakov, right, it will just say hello Yaakov. But if I put student, got to spell it correctly, and say hello student, but nothing really changed here. Why is that? Well, that's actually simple, right? Remember pass by reference, pass by value, or copy by reference, copy by value? Well, this is a primitive, and we're copying a primitive out of text content into this title. So therefore, when we change the title, the text content property is not changed at all. What we actually have to do is turn around and explicitly set it. So let's go ahead and grab this whole document thing right here, and we'll put it over here, and we'll say text content equal to title. That's the new title that we've updated right here. So now when we save that and go ahead and try it with, let's say, Yaakov, and if we click say it, we'll see hello Yaakov. But if we actually put student in here and click say it, now we've not only said hello student, but we also have updated our H1 title, and now it says lecture 53 and loving it. Now the last thing I want to point out to you is that this is a selector by ID, but we don't have to select it by ID because this is nothing more than using CSS selectors to select elements within our page. Well, if we take a look here, we could use something else. We could use the fact that there's only one H1 element in the entire page. So if I wanted to, I could simplify this by saying H1. So I erase this and just say H1. So H1 is the only element that this is going to select. And in fact, if there would be more than one H1 element in my HTML page, what this will return is the first matching element. If you wanted a list of elements that matches a particular query selection, you would use a different method. I believe it's called query all selector. So anyway, so at this point, we just want one. So if we say H1, this will accomplish exactly the same thing as calling it by title. So if we save that and test it out by saying student and click say it, and you can see this works just the same as before, and it's lecture 54 and still loving it.